Hello and welcome again, everyone, to another edition of the BIS Podcast, broadcasting live on the Marvin Network. Josh Green here with you, and on today's podcast, we're talking cybersecurity, and there is nobody more special to have than Brandon Lewis, who's our guest today here on the podcast to talk about cybersecurity. First off, Brandon, thank you for being back on the podcast with us, and how you doing, man?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me. HR said I was required to attend, so that's why I'm here.
Hey, we thought you just needed to be.
Yeah, always a fun time on the show.
Yes, definitely. So, I mean, I know you're always a good guy to talk to, Brandon, and you do a great job for us here at BIS. And again, we're going over cybersecurity today. And again, it's always gets talked about year round cybersecurity, always making sure, doing the little things to protect yourself from online threats. So, first off, Brandon, when we talk about cybersecurity, general info or what's the biggest thing to protect yourself from cybersecurity threats?
When you're thinking about cybersecurity, is you need to have a plan. Okay, the plan should cover things before an attack happens and after an attack happens. There is information out there that says that it's not just the big companies that are being targeted; it's even the smaller companies. And the smaller companies and organizations are, in my opinion, more vulnerable because they might have the resources to recover from an attack. Let's say a ransomware attack or some sort of malicious code gets in to their network and causes damage. the financial the financial hit to recover from that can be devastating for smaller organizations. And so for me, I feel like they need to be even more prepared.
And definitely so, Brandon. As you mentioned, you have to have a plan of attack. So, what are some of the steps in having that plan? Or what's the first thing, probably, that if people are just kind of learning about cybersecurity for the first time, or are trying to figure out maybe new steps to protect themselves? What, in your opinion, is the best way to start out, or what's the first step to start out with that plan?
Yeah, you need to partner with an experienced IT professional organization, you know, whether it's in-house or it's third party. You want to involve them in your plan so that they can have their technical expertise brought to bear on the particulars of your network. I mean, each organization is going to be different. There are going to be some commonalities in how you one might prepare a plan, but for each individual organization, there's going to be nuances that are going to differ from company to company. It's not like you can take a cookie cutter and stamp out a bunch of plans and say, here you go, you're protected. You really need to put some thought into this. Um, some of the things that you can start with is physical security of your organization, and I'm talking about who has access to critical infrastructure in your office, whether that's the server room uh, or the room where sensitive information is stored, or do you lock it in cabinets? Those are some of the things that you would want to think about when you're talking about physical security. I've already training is a huge part of that. Training all employees, not just not just a few, but everyone needs to be on the same page on what to do and how to respond if there is an issue, and to be able to develop behaviors that protect the organization, right? So behaviors is some things we can talk about as passwords. I mean, there's so many things you can do with passwords. Passwords should never be password, right? So you should have complex passwords. If you're not familiar with multi-factor authentication, it's very simple. There are apps that you can use that can generate um, a second step, so to speak. So it can go to your phone, it can go to your email account, and that's when you're logging in, and you have to enter a certain code in addition to your password. And so that second step makes it harder for, say, bad actors to try and force their way in by just, they can just run a program or a script that can just run through, thousands and thousands of password variations in seconds, right? Uh, and so complex passwords helps defeat that, but having that multi-factor authentication is another step that just cannot be replicated. You want to limit the number of times someone can have a failed login, and you can also encrypt, uh, data on portable devices like laptops, tablets, any USB sticks, those types of things.
Indeed, Brandon. And you talk about it right there again, having that plan and having that course of action and the steps that you need to do to protect yourself. You also talk about the, securing the physical side of things. But when
Mhm.
it comes to internally, especially when, as you've talked about the different types of scams and also the scripts that bad actors can run, if, you do click on something, again, let's kind of touch on that right quick. Say if, an employee or something like that happens, they see an email, they don't recognize it, but they see a link or whatever, and they just click on it right away. And it ends up being a scam or some type of thing where it does cause a cybersecurity threat. What is the best course of action for them to take if they somehow do click on something they don't recognize? What is the best course of action for them to take in going that next step to help secure themselves?
Immediately communicate that to the people that are responsible for reaction in your organization, whether it's your IT team or your direct supervisor. You need to immediately report that. And if you've clicked on something, um, and I think most of us are going to know what we usually expect when we click on a link, but if it differs in any way or it doesn't feel right, then you don't have to sit there and wait for it to, for you to try and do your own investigation. It's better just to report it to the professionals that can actually take a look at that really quick and say no, or yes, that was an attack, or no, that's not, that's nothing. Um, Time is going to be super important, right? Because once if it is a bad link and you've clicked on it, so now the clock is ticking, because now that link is beginning to do its work, right? um we were talking earlier about things to do to prevent these things from happening, like before an attack happens. One of those things is to have antivirus software on all of your endpoints in your organization. Clicking on a bad link in an email, uh, going to a website, even on your own, and maybe seeing an ad or something on there, or clicking on an ad on a website, those things can be mitigated by having uh, antivirus software running on your system or your network. But responding to it is really the immediately is the best thing that you can do. Uh, as an IT professional, I would rather have a client, reach out to us 10 times and it be nothing, than them not reach out and say, oh, maybe nothing really happened that time. If you have a question, I would say call your IT professional immediately.
Absolutely. And especially when it comes from outside sources and you don't even recognize who it's being sent from. And again, as you talked about, Brandon, even if they're responding to, even to us or whoever their IT person is 20 times, that, you don't really, know this, you respond to them 20 times, they respond to us or to whoever like 20 times over, it'd be better just to check it out than something bad happening.
Right. And that also offers an opportunity for the IT professionals to educate that person as well. Right. So that way we're not going to get 20 times reached out every time. It's that education that is so important for all the end users, and I would say that doing some sort of cybersecurity training where you go over different scenarios or different methods that bad actors can use to um, get into your networks will help reduce those calls as well, and it will also help establish good behaviors, that before we're just clicking on it and now we're like, wait a minute, I'm going to take a look at this. maybe hover my mouse over the link and look down. If it's an email, it'll show you in the bottom left of the email window there that where that link is going. Um, or just taking a second to look at the return address. Sometimes they don't do a very good job of spoofing those, and so that education is so critical um, to protecting your network. I wish I could train everybody in the world on it, but it's super important.
And it's important for everyone to know it from the top down.
Yes, absolutely. Everybody in the organization that has access to sensitive data, whether it's electronic or paper, should be aware of the company guidelines or the organizational guidelines that are in place to protect those documents, whether it's electronic or physical.
And in your opinion, right now, Brandon, again, we've talked about some of the type of scams that again in the past on here on the podcast, and also hear just a little bit about those bad actors. But the scams that are out there right now are the different things that different kind of cybersecurity threats that come around. What, in your opinion, right now is the maybe top one that is getting people, right now in cybersecurity? What's the biggest cybersecurity threat right now, in your opinion?
Not having a plan, you know, or thinking it can't happen to you, complacency, um, any of those things can certainly, regardless of the type of attack that can happen to your organization, being complacent or not having a plan or not being ready is probably the worst thing that anybody can do for their organization. After that, I would say that for a lot of the clients that we deal with in the government sector, they're constantly getting emails from citizens or other vendors and whatnot. And business email compromise is still a huge threat. Um, and what I mean by business email compromise is someone sending an email to a person in the organization. A lot of organizations, have email addresses on their websites that can be easily, captured by bad actors, and so they can get directly to the people that they want to target. They may call on the phone or try to socially engineer other email addresses, but business email compromises when they are trying to do a phishing either through like an email or even a text, if some organizations use texting, where it looks like it's legitimate, but it provides a link um, that tries to get that user's credentials, whether it's their sign in to Office 365 or whatever. Or even sometimes they can even be trying to get, banking information, like, oh, they may try and spoof the bank it's that organization deals with, um, and try to get their banking information so that, they could do their bad business themselves. So that's kind of like they call that phishing, but it can also be called business email compromise. And that's phishing with a PH is what that. So if you want to, if any of the web heads out there want to look that up, you can look up phishing, PHISHING, and you can see how that works.
Gotcha. So not that regular fishing where you catch some good fish and go to eat it
Right.
later.
Not the fun, relaxing type out on the lake. No, not at all. This is the bad kind that attacks you in your office.
Gotcha. Well, Brandon, we've talked about obviously all the steps that you need to do to prepare yourself. And you talked about the biggest, threat is just people not being prepared. And the biggest step is to have that plan in place, or getting the steps to have that plan in place. Talk about if something does get affected or infected with a virus or whatever kind of type of cybersecurity threat affects whatever machine or device that people are using, and there's no way maybe to solve it internally. What is the next best thing to do when it comes maybe to the destruction of the equipment?
For sure. Yeah. So anytime that you have electronic data stored on a device and that device is getting retired, okay, you want to make sure that it is responsibly retired. Um, and what I mean by that is, one, you want to make sure that it's being disposed of in a way that's appropriate for the environment. But also you want to make sure that any data that may have resided on that at one time has been cleared or wiped or is no longer accessible. Simply just deleting, like let's say you're in Windows and you're in File Explorer and you see a PDF that you don't need anymore, you delete it. That data still resides out there on that hard drive. It just has a flag on it that Windows says you're no longer active, you're deleted, and then it can reside there hidden from the user, and still be accessible from those that know how to get to it. So if you were to throw that in the trash, somebody grabs it, puts it in their computer, and they know how to suss that data out, then that data is then exposed. So you want to make sure that you're disposing of it in a manner that is consistent with your organizational guidelines and in a way that protects that data from being accessed by people who shouldn't have it, right? And if you have an IT, in-house IT or third-party IT professionals supporting you, they would be the ones that you can get with to find those resources to be able to dispose of them properly, or to guide you in how you want to how you might want to make policies regarding that for your organization.
Absolutely. Well, Brandon, we're just about out of time here on today's podcast, but anything that you'd like to say before we kind of sign things off, or something that maybe we may not have covered, anything you'd like to kind of shout out before we end things here today?
Yeah, there's so much more that we could literally have 30 more minutes or an hour more of this, but the one thing I would say that is super critical to any organization is to have a well-established backup policy. And what I mean by that is have a method of backing up core data so that even if it's not cybersecurity related, let's say that lightning strikes the building and it fries everything in the building, you want to have backups of your data, your core data, so that you can get your organization back up and running as quickly as possible. And again, your IT professionals can help you with that. But there's any number of methods to be able to back that data up. And you can ask those questions from your IT, is like, what's the best way to protect the data that they have? Because again, it's not a cookie cutter. It's going to be individual plans for each organization. So definitely having backups is one thing I have to say every time we talk about cybersecurity.
He's the man with the plan, and he knows what he's talking about, folks. Again, Brandon, we appreciate you joining us here today on this edition of the podcast. Again, talking about cybersecurity. And folks, what Brandon's talked about today and what we've discussed, again, make sure that you have that plan in place. Make sure that you have or consult, if it's us here at BIS, if we're your IT company, we'll make sure we give you the best options available. And also, any IT company use, just make sure they're valid. Again, we do a great job here at BIS. Not kind of tooting our own horn, but again, we always want to make sure that you are cyber safe. So again, Brandon, thank you so much for joining us today and enlightening us on, what it means to be cyber safe.
Thank you. I had a good time.
Hey, no problem at all, man. Anytime you want to come back, just come on by and hey, we'll get you on.
All right. Thank you so much.
No problem at all. Again, you've been listening to this edition of the BIS Podcast, broadcasting live on the Marvin Network. We've been talking cybersecurity with Brandon Lewis. Thank you again for joining us here today. And until next time, so long and goodbye.